Hey, get inspired, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into yet another episode of Life Inspired, the show where we talk all about how and why people are following God and some inspiring things God is doing in their lives. And you can watch this show and share this show from our YouTube channel, which we would love for you to subscribe to, our Facebook page, which we would ask for you to like, and also from lifeinspiredshow.com. And these are ways that you can share the show with somebody that needs to hear the story, because all of us connect with God in a different way, just like our fingerprint or our retinal scan. And so today's guest is one of the very best friends of my dear big brother. So Chris King, thank you so much for being in College Station, Texas, while I'm in South Bend, Indiana. Gig 'em Aggies. My brother's an Aggie, so gig 'em. So thanks for being with us today. So we're going to ask you three questions. We want to talk about one of the turning points that you've had in your life, maybe a couple, that have been the most impactful for the inspired life that you're walking today. So tell us a little backstory before some kind of a ... and then God moment in your life. What's some background to whatever story you're going to share?
Um, Background. The first turning point, of course, was when I became a Christian at 13. Everything else led from that point. And there's lots of turning points, a whole lot of them.
Sure.
But there was a point at which I wanted to understand what it would be like, or what it was like, to be an entrepreneur, to be an independent business person, and to take those sort of risks and things like that. Because I had had jobs with the university, which is, kind of mundane, actually. And then I had a job with a company, but I was always a product developer, and I've always been an adventurer in many ways. I also have a lot of faith that I cannot. I kind of go by the idea that if I'm a child of God, that means I'm a child of the Creator of all things. And
Absolutely.
obviously, God is capable of taking care of me, so I can step out with a tremendous amount of courage. Okay. And I
Wow.
did that in, I think it was 1994. I left a very good job, and my boss said, "Well, what's wrong?" And I said, "Well, it's a small company, and this company is a three-rung ladder. You're on the second rung, and you're not going anywhere soon." Okay. uh, so I ended up leaving a very good job with a mortgage, a wife that was a stay-at-home mom, and two kids, and I left a steady paycheck. Okay. People thought I was crazy. I thought I was crazy, but that's kind of normal for me. And for the next 18 years, I was an independent consultant. Um, and most of those years, most of the adventures I went through were successes. There were a few failures, nothing big on the failure list, except this one event that happened to me in Omaha, Nebraska. And I refer to it as my spectacular failure. I lost, I didn't lose, like, for example, my house, but I went into debt so far that my net worth was down about $120,000, which that's a lot of money, okay, to lose. And I lost on top of that another 40,000 because I cashed in all my retirement and everything. So it was really, really difficult. Um, most I think most men fear failure like that, and I did at the time. And it was I could go into the details. I mean, I, along with a whole bunch of other people, went to Omaha, Nebraska to start a motherboard manufacturing company. We had an agreement with an investor, a billionaire from the United Kingdom, who was going to put money into the company, about $100 million. Um, I understood
Wow.
startups, so I was as committed as was reasonable. For example, I didn't sign a lease on an apartment in Omaha, Nebraska. I certainly didn't move my kids or my wife. Um, there was about 40 different people that went to Omaha to do this, and many of them sold their homes, bought homes in Omaha, Nebraska.
Wow.
Ultimately, in the end, the investor backed out, and so it was all over. And what caused me the most financial failure was the fact that I had hired some people to replace my job functions here in College Station. One of them was a very good friend of mine that was a college roommate, a man named Dan Vitale. And then, just because I ended up not getting the job I had thought I was going to get in Omaha, Nebraska, I wasn't going to renege on my commitments to these people that I hired. And so I spent the next 3 years doing everything I could to make enough money for myself, make enough money for the guys that worked for me, and it just kept not happening. And I also still had relationships in Omaha, Nebraska. I met probably two of the best people I've ever met in my life, a man named Bob Can and another person who was the president of the company that went under, George Abbott. And, from that, I actually got out of that deal something I really wanted. Part of the reason I went to Omaha was because I was going to be able to work with some people at a higher caliber than I'd ever met before in my life. One of them, for example, was a guy that had automated all of Ford Motor Company's manufacturing plants around the world.
Wow.
Okay, so these were people I wanted to work side by side with. And in the end, I remember telling George when he was down one day in his living room, I asked him, why are you down? He said, I just want to make everyone whole again. All of those people that got harmed by that event. And I told him, I said, George, I can't speak for everybody else, but I understand what the word startup means. I understand I was taking a risk. I didn't quite understand how badly it was going to affect me, but I understood what I was getting into. And so you don't have any responsibility to make me whole. Okay. And so then I told him, I said, besides, we still have some assets left. Part of the reason they asked me to come work with this company is because I had a patent on some software that they thought would be good to be bundled with these motherboards. And I said, well, we still have that. Let's sell that. And so we formed a company, and that's when he introduced me to Bob Can. And we had a little bit of success with that company. Not enough, but we had a little bit. And that's basically the time that defined me in so many different ways. So
that's awesome.
Anyway, the turning point that I guess I would like to illustrate is I never moved my family from College Station. I actually commuted to Omaha for the company originally. That took about 6 months before it finally went under. But then I started commuting up there to work with the business things we were trying to do with the technology and everything. And every time I would get on the road to go back to College Station, and I drove, okay, the connections between College Station and Omaha, terrible. And I like to drive, okay. It takes about 13 and a half hours to get to Omaha from here.
Wow.
So every time I would set off to go back, I would have breakfast with Bob Can, and we would talk a lot of times about spiritual things. Okay, he's a very, very devout Christian, and a different flavor from me. He's a Church of Christ, and I am. I don't know how to describe me actually in terms of any denomination, but I remember one morning I was basically crying on his shoulders, figuratively, not literally, and I just told him, I said, Bob, I just don't understand. I try all the time to do what is right. I try to I never lie. I don't cheat anyone, and I always try to take care of everybody I interact with, my employees, my customers, all of them. And I said, I don't believe in prosperity gospel, okay, at all. The Bible tends to teach the opposite of that. But at that time, I kind of felt like I should at least get a little bit of a break. And so I said, I just don't understand. I do everything I'm supposed to do. I'm courageous. I never I never falter in these things, and yet I fail time after time after time. And he said to me, one of the most important things I've ever heard in my life. He said to me, he said, "We are not responsible for the results. We are only responsible to be obedient."
Wow.
And it was like all of the burden of that whole thing and all of the results of that whole thing were lifted from me at that very moment.
That's
And
awesome.
I was no longer depressed about the whole situation. I mean, I spent a lot of those years crying. Uh, I was no longer depressed.
Uh-huh.
I felt like this is obviously where God wants me to be for his reasons. Okay.
Right.
It took me 7 years to recover from, at least financially, from that particular event. And all that time, things happened to me that had never happened to me before. Like, for example, I slowed down. I couldn't do that before. But since I had to pay back all the debt, I went and I just worked. It felt like a jail sentence, but it made me a much more stable person. I would say that I'm a very adventuresome person, and now I'm still adventuresome, but a little bit more measured in the adventures that I choose. Okay, so that changed me. The other thing that the biggest benefit is that when you have a spectacular failure in life like that, and you get to the other side, you feel almost invincible. You're not invincible, you know you're not, but everything else that happens to you is measured against that time, that event.
Sure.
And you go, I've seen worse than this. Okay. The company I worked for, when the fracking boom happened in 2014, the company I work for is highly dependent upon offshore oil exploration and development and things of that nature. And that particular industry took a hit of about 80%. We went from 45 million a year down to about 15 million a year. And at that time, I was actually getting kind of bored. I'd already developed all of I'm a director of IT for the company I work for, and I had developed the department and trained the guys that worked for me to do what they do. And they came to me and they said, we tell us who we can lay off in your department. And I told them, just cut my salary in half, no big deal. Okay, because when you're an independent consultant for 18 years, your concept of job security is just not the same.
Right.
So it wasn't a big deal. And that is something, it not being a big deal is something that came from me going, I've seen stuff far worse than this. And I was able to encourage a lot of the other people that worked in that job because I had that experience.
Sure.
I had a neighbor who went through a terrible, terrible time in his life. And I was able to help him. I was able to say, hang in there. Don't give up. You're going to get through this. And when you do, you will feel invincible. You will not be invincible, but you will feel invincible. And he got through it. It was wonderful to watch him get through it. While he was going through it, I was crying a lot for him. But everybody ought to have in their life at least one spectacular failure that they get through. And I think that God knows exactly how much you can handle and will take you to the brink. The verse is crushed but not broken. Okay.
Right.
And the ability to, I no longer worry about money, for example, because it's not that important, not really. If you lose it, you can just make some more, or you can accept help from other people. I had to learn to do that. I had to learn to accept help from other people. That's hard,
right?
And I have been pathologically independent my whole life, and so it was a very humbling experience in many ways too.
Sure.
But that's my story.
Well, I thank you for getting my brother through his last 6 months. And for viewers that don't know, my sister-in-law passed away about 6 months ago. And Chris is one of my brother's very dearest friends. And because of your love for my brother and you checking up on him, and probably because you had that failure, you were able to see you can get through this
No,
too, Rick. And I
you
just am
know,
grateful.
that's sort of, yes. One of the things about a spectacular failure is you feel so alone. You feel like you're the only one who understands what you're going through, and in many cases that's true actually. And I didn't want Rick to feel that. Um,
Well, thanks.
so
Yeah. So one last quick little question. How do you stay inspired daily? What is it that you do on a daily basis to stay connected and stay grounded and know that he's the one that's getting you through this? What can you advise people that are like you, how they might try to get connected if they don't feel connected?
uh, the best advice, I guess, is just pray all the time, constantly.
All the
I
time.
think I learned it. Well, actually, I learned it right after I became a Christian when I was 13, and that was a difficult time for me. I was the nerd in high school. I didn't have any friends, and I was picked on all the time. It was terrible. I couldn't stand people. But I prayed all the time. I really did fervently
That's
believe
awesome.
that God could create the universe. He could certainly uh, talk to me if he wanted to. And I really,
Right?
I'm kind of a Pentecostal in that sense because I do believe that God has spoken to me in many ways, and at many times, and especially between ages 13 and 17, and because I was really really alone at that time, and so that's where I learned to just pray all the time, and
Very cool.
it it's interesting. It's interesting. I remember telling a friend of mine that faith can be painful sometimes, and she said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, she was a very good friend of mine, and she had two children that you know were very close to all of us, and one of her children's name was Anna." And I said, "Well, it's kind of like this. Let's say I was a immensely wealthy person that you knew, and we were friends, and Anna ended up coming up with some illness that was fixable but needed a very expensive operation. And you came to me and you asked me, would you uh, please pay for this operation?" And I said, if I said no, what would that do to our relationship? And she understood because I was really referring to, when you ask God to fix a problem in your life and the problem doesn't get fixed, it can challenge your faith. Okay. Um, what's beautiful about many of the challenges I've had in my life, some of them horribly tragic, um, is I've gotten through all of them. And once you get through them all, you start to realize that that was part of your life that God apparently allowed to happen for your benefit. I know at
Wow.
least it has for me.
Very cool. Yep, absolutely. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing, Chris. This has been phenomenal.
Nothing. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yep. So everybody that's watching, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, or just the internet, please share Chris's story. I know there's someone that you know that may be going through their failure right now. And so Chris's story could really be a blessing to them. So share his story with them. If you would like to connect that person with Chris, I know that he would have virtual coffee or call somebody. He spent many hours on the phone with my brother, so thanks for that. So yeah, so let us know if you want to get in touch with Chris. Chris, thanks again so much. We're so grateful. And
Thanks
you
for
guys
having me.
have a great week. Don't forget, like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and share on lifeinspiredshow.com. Thank you guys. Have a great week. Bye-bye.